I've got a story for you, a real dark one. The kind that crawls under your skin and settles in your bones. It's a murder soaked in gasoline, lies, and time. And justice that showed up late, unfortunately dragging its feet. So pull up a stool, maybe pour a strong one, and listen close. Because this one is going to send a chill straight down your spine. Whispers behind closed doors. The Vernieri murder. It was a quiet Friday in East Rutherford. The kind of afternoon where nothing much stirs but the breeze and back porch gossip. Then came the smoke, slow at first, curling from the windows of 70-year-old Barbara Vernieri's house like a warning no one wanted to read. Neighbors called the fire department, figuring it was maybe a kitchen mishap or possibly a forgotten candle. But what firefighters found inside wasn't an accident. It was a crime scene, soaked in gasoline and horror. Barbara hadn't died from the flames. She'd been beaten, drenched in accelerant, and set alight. All while she was still alive. The fire didn't cover it up. It lit the fuse. And the man they said did it? He didn't face justice just once. He faced it twice. One murder, two trials, and a town that would never forget this horrible incident. September 14th, 2012. Smoke curled up into the late summer sky over Shepherd Street like a whispered from hell. Lazy, almost casual. Leaking out from the eaves of a plain little house that really didn't ask for attention. The kind of house people forget until it starts to burn. Firefighters rolled in fast and hard, breaking through the heat and the haze. Ready for the usual suspects. Faulty wiring, maybe a scorched pan in the kitchen, careless cigarette, but what they found didn't come from a fuse box. She was on a floor, motionless, lifeless. Barbara Vernieri, 70 years old, a grandmother, a real estate agent, the kind of neighbor who still waved from her porch. Bergen County knew her, respected her. At first, the flames looked guilty, an open-end, shut-in case of smoke and sorrow. But underneath the cold lights of the morgue, the truth surfaced like a body in deep water. Barbara hadn't died in the fire. She had been beaten hard and often. Her skull caved in by blunt force. The kind of work done by someone who wanted to make sure. Then came the gasoline, poured without hesitation, soaking her body, her home, her story. A single flick of flame turned the scene into a furnace. It wasn't passion. It wasn't panic. It was calculated. A murder disguised as a fire. Designed to burn the evidence. Bury the truth. But it didn't burn clean. Not all of it. And in the ashes, the killer just enough for the story to rise again. The neighborhood didn't see this coming. Barbara wasn't mixed up in drugs. Didn't owe anyone money. Didn't keep company with the kind of people who leave bodies behind. She was clean, too clean for an ending like this. So the question hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't clear. Who would want her dead? And why? When the smoke finally drifted off Shepherd Street, what it left behind wasn't peace, it was questions. That's when the real work began. Detectives went back between Barbara Vernieri's final days, step by step, hour by hour, and day by day, digging through call logs, retracing her movement, and of course, knocking on doors that haven't seen this kind of darkness in a long time. They weren't chasing chaos. What they found was quieter, tighter, a pattern. One name kept floating to the surface like oil on water. Daniel Rotchet, 37 years old, lived just over the tracks in Woodridge. He wasn't a stranger. He brushed up against Barbara's world through some small business deal. Just close enough to know her habits, just far enough to stay off their radar. But to those who met him, Rotchet didn't come across as harmless. He came across as trouble. People described him the way you describe a storm cloud, slow moving, unpredictable, and ready to snap. He was dealing with money problems, personal problems, the kind of quiet desperation that gets loud behind closed doors. There were whispers, erratic behavior, bad debts, short fuse. He wasn't just a guy with a connection. He was a guy with a motive. And the deeper detectives dug, the more the red flags stacked up like kindling. His hands were torn up, fresh injuries. He couldn't explain. His cell phone ping near Barbara's house right around the time everything went to hell. Surveillance cameras spotted him in the neighborhood, lurking where he didn't belong. He had her things, jewelry, electronics, cash, like trophies he thought no one would miss. And worst of all, he lied to the cops, to his friends, about where he'd been, about what he'd done. Every word cracked under pressure. Every alibi leaked. What started as a fire call had morphed into something else, something meaner. A murder wrapped in gasoline and silence. And the man they were looking for, he wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was hiding in plain sight. Rotchet didn't bolt. He lingered in plain sight, maybe thinking he could outwalk the shadow that was creeping up behind him. But the evidence had a long memory. Just days after Barbara Vernieri, 70 years old, and still tough as nails, was found murdered in her East Rutherford home, Rotchet was in cuffs. His hands told a story his mouth wouldn't. Scraped, marked by the kind of fight that only ends one way. In the trunk of his car, gasoline cans. The kind arsonists favor when they want to clean up the mess. But you can't burn a digital trail. His phone lit up near the scene like a match in a dark alley. Wrong time, wrong place, no alibi. Then came the clincher. The lab boys pulled DNA from the scene, and it sang his name like a canary in a cage. Prosecutors didn't blink. They called it what it was. the smoking gun. And this time, it was personal. It was 2017, 5 long years after the smoke cleared on Shepherd Street, when Daniel Rotchett finally stood before a judge and jury. The courtroom buzzed with the weight of time and silence. Press showed up early. Locals packed the benches. This wasn't just a murder trial, it was a reckoning. The prosecution came loaded, not with guesswork, but with evidence. Cold, measured, relentless. Cell teller records drew invisible lines through time and space. Every one of them pointed to Rotchett, circling Barbara Vernieri's home like a vulture. He hadn't just lied to the police, he lied poorly, shifting timelines, contradictions in his testimony, holes in his story, wide enough to drive a cruiser through. Then came the loot. The things that should have died with Barbara: jewelry, electronics, personal effects, found tucked away in his possession like souvenirs from a crime he couldn't walk away from. And finally, the clincher: DNA. Small, silent, inescapable. Traces of Rotchett were found on the barber's fingernails, microscopic witnesses to a struggle that ended in fire. The DA didn't need theatrics. The evidence spoke for itself. A slow building indictment wrapped in science, motive, and blood. They painted a picture of a man who spiraled into desperation, who didn't just kill, he tried to burn the truth away. But fire doesn't erase everything. And the jury, they knew it. The science was cutting edge and controversial. Low copy DNA analysis, LCN. It's the method investigators turn to when a sample is too small, too degraded for traditional testing. It's whisper thin evidence pulled from the margins of a crime scene. But even whispers can scream the truth. Experts took the stand, calm and clinical under the weight of cross-examination. And they didn't mince words. Daniel Rotchett couldn't be ruled out. In fact, the traces pulled from beneath Barbara Vernieri's fingernails put him too close. Close enough to fight, close enough to kill. The jury didn't flinch. When the verdict came down, it hit like a crack of a gavel in a silent room. Murder, felony murder, aggravated arson, desecrating human remains, burglary. Every count stuck. Rotchett wasn't just guilty, he was buried. The judge didn't hesitate. Life in prison, no parole, no second chances. Stacked with years, tacked on like iron weights. The gavel came down hard, echoing through the chamber like a tombstone sealing his fate. For the town, his victim, for his justice, it was over. Or so they thought. Then, in 2022, everything cracked wide open. A seismic jolt that shook the case to its core. The appellate division of the New Jersey Superior Court stepped in and flipped the verdict on its head. Why? Why would they do that? The linchpin wasn't new evidence. It was the DNA. The court ruled that the low copy number DNA testing, that razor thin forensic thread that had nailed Roger in the first place, wasn't as solid as everyone had thought. It wasn't broadly accepted in the scientific community, at least not enough to meet New Jersey's strict rules of evidence. What had once seemed airtight now had a glaring hole, and the conviction was reversed. It wasn't freedom ringing for Ratchet. Far from it. He wasn't exonerated. The court simply said that the evidence that they pinned him on wasn't good enough to stand in court. That ruling threw prosecutors into uncharted waters, a rare, cold twist in a homicide case. They had to roll the dice, and they decided to do a retrial. In 2024, almost a dozen years after Barbara Vernieri's life was snuffed out, Daniel Rochett faced the jury again. This time, the battleground was Hackensack, New Jersey, and the stakes had never been higher. Without the DNA, there was no forensic evidence to lean on, so they sharpened the case on the evidence of circumstance and called hard facts. Rochett lied to the cops, twisted truths, dodged questions like a man with something to hide. His footprints were stamped all over the scene. The cell tower, cameras, the witnesses, gasoline, the same kind that fueled the fire that took Barbara's life, was found tucked away in his car, an unspoken confession waiting to ignite. In 2024, almost a dozen years after Barbara Vernieri's life was snuffed out, Rochett faced the jury again. This time, the battleground was Hackensack, New Jersey, and the stakes could never have been higher. Without the DNA evidence, the prosecution focused and sharpened their case on the edges of circumstance and cold hard facts. Rochett lied to the cops. He twisted truths, he dodged questions, like a man with something to hide. His footprints were stamped all over the scene. The cell tower, the cameras, the witnesses. Gasoline, the same kind that fueled the fire that took Barbara's life, was found tucked away in his car, an unspoken confession waiting to ignite. And then there were the valuables, the jewelry, the electronics, pawned by Rochett, traded like dirty secrets from a crime no one could forget. Witnesses stepped up. They painted a picture of a man acting like guilt was crawling under his skin. He was restless, he was nervous, intolerant. On April 25th, 2024, the jury delivered its second verdict. Guilty. Again. On July 27th, Judge Christopher Caslow sentenced Rochett to life in prison under the No Early Release Act. He packed on 10 years for aggravated arson, packed on 10 years for desecrating human remains. It was a punishment reaffirmed without the tainted DNA evidence. The case of Barbara Vernieri drags shadows through the alleyways of truth. What dark impulse pushes a soul to strike with savage, desperate hands? Can we really trust to hold card evidence of science that was paraded through the courts? And what shape does justice take when it stumbles through two trials, drags on for 12 years, and needs a second jury to finally whisper a verdict? For Barbara's family, the wound never closes. It's an endless night without dawn. But with the second conviction, maybe, just maybe, peace will slip through the cracks. Justice was a hard road, paved with shadows and doubt, but it came in the end.